All right, well, welcome everybody. Our topic for today is about planting a fall garden. And I know it might seem a little crazy talking about that right now when it's, approaching 100 degrees today and for the next few days. But actually, this is the time to be thinking about this. So, um, reasons for planting a fall garden, because typically people are more used to just thinking about this early spring garden and then the summer garden with the tomatoes and the peppers. And sometimes as we get towards the end of July, people are kind of winding down and thinking, well, I've already blown this, or this crop didn't do well, so there's not much I can do about it. But here's some good reasons for thinking about having a fall garden, for planting one. One is that you have a longer harvest period. Like when you plant broccoli in the springtime, there's kind of a limited harvest period because it's starting to turn hot, and other crops too. It's getting hotter as the spring advances and the crops are going to seed and they're not doing as well. But in the fall, it's just the opposite. Things are getting cooler, and if the weather doesn't get too cold, things just go on and on and on, and you can keep harvesting for quite a while until the cold really shuts them down. Another reason, though, is maybe you missed out on planting your early spring crops. That happens sometimes when we get lots of rain and maybe you can't get things in at the right time, or maybe you just weren't ready. You didn't have your ground tilled up in time, and you planted your summer stuff but did not get a chance to plant that early spring lettuce and broccoli and cabbage and kale. So this is a chance to do that again. It's also just a good way to use space, in your garden. If you had some crops that came out from the springtime, they're done, or maybe something from your summer crops didn't turn out, maybe your zucchini already died or something, and you've got a little bit of empty space in your garden, this is a good way to use that space. And for some crops, you can also take this opportunity to stock things up for your freezer. And probably the best example of this would be broccoli. You can freeze broccoli that you grow in the fall and then have it for eating throughout the winter. And then yet another reason for a fall garden is you actually get higher quality crops because of the cooler temperatures at harvest time. I'm thinking again, specifically things like broccoli, but also cabbage and kale and collards. They do their best maturing in cool weather, but in the spring, they're actually maturing in the warm weather because it's getting warmer and warmer as spring advances. And when you plant in the late summer for fall, as that broccoli is coming close to being harvested, and the cabbage and the kale and all those things, the night temperatures are getting cooler, and so the plants are better quality. The sugars are accumulating in them. They're sweeter. They taste better, and so much better quality in fall. And then sometimes, not always, sometimes certain pests are less of a problem for fall crops. If you ever planted, the different brassicas like cabbage, broccoli, collards, kale, that there are little cabbage worms that get into them. And sometimes in the fall, there's life cycle off a little bit. They're not so prevalent, although they can be around. But the later you get into the fall, the less you'll have problems with most of the bugs that cause problems in the springtime. But here is probably, if you don't learn anything else today, this is what I want you to learn, is that the most important thing about planting a fall garden is you don't plant it in the fall. And so why do we call it fall gardening then? Well, we call it fall gardening because you're harvesting in the fall, but you're actually going to be planting in late summer or midsummer, actually. So the main planting window for these crops for fall harvest is from July 20th to August 31st. So that's the main planting window. Each crop will have their own individual planting windows, but that's kind of the overall time. So it's coming up soon. Next week, you can actually start planting some things for fall. But we'll talk about proper planting dates and how to know when the right time is. But again, you don't plant your fall garden in the fall. Just to give you a little bit of a background here on the seasons here in Kansas City area, we've got 3 seasons for vegetable gardening. We have that spring cool season crops where you plant them early in the spring. and you harvest them in late spring, early summer. That's typically what people are used to. That starts, in mid-March, late March, early April, and then that stuff usually harvests, in late May, early June, and July, and it's pretty much done by then. And then there's the summer warm season crops. So again, that's things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cucumbers, melons, all that stuff. And you're planting in late spring, when it's warm after the frost, May 1st, that around that time. And you're going to be harvesting through the summer. And some of those crops are just going to continue, all the way up till frost. Hopefully your tomatoes will keep going, your peppers will keep going. And so that's the summer warm season. And then there's this chance for a second cool season, and that's what we call the fall cool season. But you're planting in midsummer for fall harvesting. And it's just a little bit different. That's why we're talking about this as a separate topic today, a special workshop devoted just to growing a fall garden, because the weather conditions are a little bit different. If you think about it, in springtime, the air temperatures are cool and the soil temperatures are cool. But when you're planting for a fall garden, you're planting in late July and early August. So the air temperatures are very warm. In fact, sometimes really warm. In fact, I would say just plain hot. And the soil temperatures are already warm. So things sprout quicker. There's different things that are affected by the temperatures being warm now as opposed to spring being cool. The other thing is typically in the spring, March and April, we're getting lots of rain. In fact, sometimes it rains so much that we can't actually get stuff planted on time because it just keeps the soil too wet. So, but this time of year, we're not getting much rainfall. Hopefully we'll get some rain, and we will get some rain a little bit later, we hope. But sometimes during that planting time, we're not getting much rain at all. And then this last one is a little bit not quite as intuitive. You wouldn't think about this as much, but in the springtime, when you're planting, each day the light is increasing because we're getting into longer days, and the light is getting stronger. So plants are getting more sunlight, and that affects how they're growing. But in the fall, you start out with lots of light and long days and intense light. But as we get farther, like in September, days are getting shorter. The light is not as intense. And we get to October, days are definitely getting shorter. And so the light isn't as strong. So plants don't grow as fast the later in the fall you go. So that's just to give you a difference, the difference between the spring garden conditions and the fall garden conditions. All right, so one of the things I like to do when I teach workshops is give people keys to success. Sometimes it helps if you can just think about what are the main things I need to think about. And this would be your keys to success for fall gardening. There's 4 of them. The first one would be crop selection. And we're going to talk about all these here in just a little bit. Choosing the right crops. Some things are not good candidates for fall. For instance, watermelon. It's too late. If you plant watermelon now, it won't have time to grow, and it's going to get too cold. But cabbage will be a great one because you'll plant that and it will grow when it's cooler in the fall and get off to a great start when it's warm and be fun. So picking the right crops is important. Timing, planting at the right time is critical. You can plant green beans early in July, but because the temperatures will be so hot and it's time for them to flower, they're not going to produce beans. So that's why we plant green beans a little bit later, end of July, 1st of August, and then they flower at the right time. And it's cooling down just a little bit so that you'll get a good crop of beans. So timing is real important so that plants have time enough to finish and go through the entire cycle so you can harvest them at the right time. And of course, watering is very important for fall gardens because when you are starting out, it's dry and it's very hot, and just trying to keep those little baby seedlings alive could be a real challenge. So watering properly, making sure you're watering enough and often enough, and just the proper way to water. So And then this last one is mulching. And, you know, I'm always kind of amazed at gardeners who try to garden without mulching. In the spring garden, you can get away with it a little bit because you get lots of rain, the crops get bigger, you know, they get roots down farther before it gets too hot. But now you're starting out with really hot temperatures and really low rain. So mulching is so much more important for fall gardening. But I think it's a good thing to do anytime for spring, summer, and fall. Mulching is a good thing to do. But I really encourage people to do mulching for fall. And we'll talk more about that and how to do it and what to use for mulch. So this will kind of set the stage here for all the things we're talking about today. All right, let's talk about crop selection. So typically, all the cool season crops, you can grow them except for the ones that have exceptionally long seasons. So that would be things like potatoes, bulb onions, Brussels sprouts. You can try Brussels sprouts for fall, and sometimes people get good success with it if they grow them fast enough. But a lot of those things just do not do well. The bulb onions, they need a longer time. Potatoes need a longer time. But all the normal things like beets and arugula, and here you see some kale and some Napa cabbages, these are all good candidates. We actually have a list, a resource available on the website. There's a planting calendar. It shows you all the right planting dates, and it shows planting dates for spring and planting dates for fall. And so the ones that you see planting dates for fall lets you know that that's a good candidate for fall crops. So, but again, those criteria are it needs to be cool season crops. There's a couple of exceptions. We'll talk about those, like the green beans. But again, also it needs to be a relatively short season crop, meaning from the time you plant it in late summer to the time when things are starting to get ready for frost, it needs to be able to finish in that time. And here's a list. These are all the ones that are good: arugula, broccoli, carrots, collards, cilantro, kale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All cool season ones. Again, you can grow onions, but if you grow onions for fall, you're just going to be growing for green onions, not bulbs. The bulbs wouldn't have time to develop, wouldn't have long enough season. And you can grow the snap peas if you like sugar snap peas, but you need to grow the dwarf variety because the regular tall sugar snap peas take too long. They would not have enough time to develop good crops for harvesting. So all these ones are really good choices. And then here's a few ones that are a little bit different. They are, oops, sorry, skip the slide there. Let's go back. Here are some of the ones that are not typical cool season crops, but you can plant them for a fall garden because they grow pretty fast and you'll get a chance to harvest them. So green beans, you'll see the planting dates on those is like July 20th through about August 10th. The squash, summer squash, so think of like yellow squash up above there, and the zucchini squash, those are both summer squashes. They grow fast. If you plant them at the end of July, there's a good chance you'll get a nice harvest. And that also works sometimes because oftentimes people have their first crops that they planted early will die because of the squash vine borer, which is a real bad insect pest, or the squash bugs. But sometimes when you plant later, you miss a lot of those pests, and they give you a chance to get some more of those summer squash that you can harvest for later in the season. And then cucumber. If you plant cucumber real quickly at the end of July, you can still get a nice harvest on cucumbers. Anyhow, so back to that timing, that general planting window, again, very important, July 20th to August 31st, but that's the general planting window. Not every crop can you wait till August 31st. Not every crop would you want to plant as early as July 20th. July 20th is too early for lettuce. But if you look at the planting calendar that we have, it tells you that when to plant lettuce, it's within this window, but it's not at the beginning. And if you can do some lettuce at the end of the window, But like if you wait till August 31st to plant your broccoli, it won't have time to finish. So it needs to be earlier in the window. But you have to look at the planting calendar. Each crop will have its own specific planting window within this broad window. But this is the basic time for fall gardening planting, just to give you the overall picture here. All right, so here's our planting calendar. If you're going to do this, you're going to look on the document. This is on our website. It's available. The fall crops planting calendar, and it lists just the dates for the fall crops. Makes it really easy. So if you look here, like arugula, it tells you starting August 1st through August 20th. And that's the ideal. Again, you could plant it a little sooner, but you'd be more likely to have them go to seed too early. You can plant it a little bit later, but if we get early frost, they may not survive as long. You won't get as long a harvest, but you still get some. So each one of these is what's considered the ideal planting window, and you should try to aim for that. The other thing that's going to affect your timing of planting is the weather. Sometimes, as you might guess, and as what we're having right now, it gets really hot. So let's say you want to plant cabbage plants and you've got some, but the weather is really hot and it looks like it's going to be 100 degrees for several days, like it's going to be possibly this coming week. That might not be the best time for planting your cabbage plants, your broccoli or cabbage or kale. So you might want to wait a few days. So I tell people to look at that extended forecast. And if there are some days that are better than others, so lots of times look at the 10-day forecast, and let's say the first 5 days are really hot. They're close to 100. The nighttime temperatures are very high, like 78 to 80. And there's no rain in the forecast. That's not the best time for planting. But if you look at that extended forecast, and let's say 5 days out from now, it looks like the temperatures cool off. We have a cool front come through. We have some rain. The ground gets softer. You can till up the ground easier, and the temperatures drop, like 10 to 15 degrees. Maybe it's only going to be in the 80s. And wouldn't that be great? Right now, that's what I'm hoping for, and that's what I hope for every year. When it gets to this time of year, I hope that the highs will be in the 80s and the lows will be like 70 or 68. And we've had a little bit of that, but right now it looks like we're in kind of a warm, very hot cycle, and the days are going to be hotter and the nights are going to be hotter. So still, you want to look in that 10-day forecast and pick the best planting days where you have several cooler days in a row, ideally. Here's a close-up of that planting calendar so you can see all the different dates. And these are just the fall dates. This doesn't have the spring dates with it. So sometimes you'll notice, like for instance, after broccoli, it says broccoli, and then it says plants in parentheses. So what that means is when you plant broccoli, you are not going to be planting seeds. You are going to be planting plants. You need to purchase plants. If you just put broccoli seeds out starting July 25th, they will not have time to mature. But the plants, they were started like the beginning of July. And so they have time to grow to a small seedling, and then they're ready to plant out at July 25th. So, but if you don't see that word plants after the name of the crop, then you were going to be planting it from seed. But just to kind of summarize, the ones that you're going to be planting plants would be broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. Trying to think what else here. Those are the main ones that you pretty much have to do from plants. There's some that you can do seeds or plants. So like kale and collards, you can plant them, or lettuce, you can plant them as seeds. But also we do sell some plants, especially for the head lettuce varieties like romaine. We'll have plants for that. So sometimes it's easier to start with a plant. So a lot of people like to go ahead and purchase. If they're going to do collards or kale or lettuce, head lettuce, they want to go ahead and buy seedlings rather than try to start them as seed. Because I tell you, in the late summer, little tiny seeds and seedlings, sometimes it's hard to get them going and keep them alive if it's really hot. So you're better off starting with the plant. But things like carrots and beets, beans, spinach, all those kinds of things, they are just planted as seeds. You're not going to be buying plants. Just plant them as seeds and they'll grow better that way. They don't like transplanting. So that's why some plants you plant them as seeds and other ones you wait and purchase plants. So let's talk a little bit just about how to deal with the extreme heat at planting time. We talked a little bit about that, but what I tell people is watch the extended forecast, see what the 10 days look like, knowing that that could change. Like right now, it's saying we got 10 days of really hot weather, but that could change if a cool front were to appear on the horizon. And it could be that like 5 days from now, we'll get a big change and the weather will get cooler. So look at that extended forecast. And within that extended forecast, look to see if there's a better or even slightly better. And when I say slightly better, if instead of the temperatures being 100 degrees for the high, if they're only 95 and there's like 5 days of that in a row, that's better than 5 days of 100. 5 degrees temperatures can make a big difference. So look in the 10-day forecast, see if there's a slightly better period and wait for that. If there is no better weather period forecast, then at some point you just need to plant anyhow. So wait and see. It starts about July 25th or so, and looking at that 10-day forecast, if you're not seeing anything and still is terrible hot, temperatures are 100 every day, by about August 5th, I say go ahead and plant anyways, regardless of what the temperatures are. If it's going to change in a day or so, sure, you can do that. But if you don't see any change in sight by August 5th, I tell people go ahead and plant. Just the plants will survive. You're just going to have to be more careful about watering them and take care of them. Make sure they're mulched. Sometimes maybe a little shade protection. That's only if its temperatures are, like up in the hundreds. So, and then again, the other thing with dealing with the extreme heat at planting time is you're going to take extra care to water your newly planted seeds frequently so they don't dry out and so they will sprout. If you don't do it frequently, they will dry out and that'll interrupt their germinating process and it'll take them a lot longer to sprout. So you want to water frequently and keep those seeds moist where you just plant the seeds. And of course, where you planted any baby plants, you're going to want to make sure that they stay moist and don't dry out because their roots do not go very deep at that point. So that's how we deal with the extreme heat at planting time. Let's talk a little bit about preparing the ground for planting fall crops. Lots of times there's stuff already in your garden that you need to get rid of, like weeds. Let's say you had a patch that totally got overtaken with weeds and it didn't produce very much. You pull all those weeds out. It'd be good to do that before they go to seed, and then that'll give you some space for planting. Or if you had some crops, your spring crops. Let's say you had some broccoli out there and they're pretty much done. The onions are ready to pull out, so pull them, harvest them, things like that. Whatever previous crops were left, you want to pull them out completely, put them on your compost pile. If it's something you're not eating, if there's just stalks left and leaves, etc. So get rid of the plant residues, and then you want to till, or you can. So wait, I'm sorry. Back up for a second. So the way to get rid of the plant residues, if you've got lots of weeds, there's different ways to do that. Sometimes if it's not too bad, you can just till them under. But if you have some big weeds, you're going to need to do some hand pulling. And I recommend watering first before you pull weeds by hand. It seems kind of terrible to actually water a patch of weeds, but if you've got a big patch of weeds and you need to pull them out by hand, water them first. It'll make it so much easier. If they're very small, you can just hoe them out. Beyond that, sometimes you need to take a fork. If it's a deep-rooted thing, take a fork or a spade and dig underneath it and pull the plant out by the roots and then shake the dirt off of it. I've also had cases, and most people have, where a patch of garden gets totally away from you, gets totally overgrown with weeds, and you can't even see if there was anything else in there. So sometimes the answer is just mowing that down, or if it's too tall for that, sometimes the answer is to take a weed eater and just cut it as short as you can, and then rake off all the extra weeds and throw them in the compost pile, or get rid of them some other way. And then if it's cut really short with the weed eater or with the mower, then you can till it up after that. So that's how you get rid of that weed cover and crop residue cover. And so typically you would be putting that stuff in your compost pile. If it's something that was diseased or had a lot of insects on it, you may not want to put it in your compost pile. You might want to discard it and just not have it be part of your compost. All right, we're still preparing that ground for getting ready for planting. Anything you can do to get ready ahead of time, meaning, you know, don't wait until July 25th to pull that stuff out. Get that stuff out as soon as it's done, you know, and then that you'll be ready. If there's weeds, get them out of there as soon as you can, so that it'll be ready to till. And the first chance you get when it's not too wet, right now that's not an issue. More likely it's too dry. And so usually this time of year, it's a question of the ground is being too dry, especially if you haven't been watering it because there's nothing growing in there. The soil gets really hard and it's almost impossible to till. So I actually recommend, if you've had a drought period, to go ahead and water the area that you're going to till up first and let it sit for just a couple of days, maybe even just one day, and then it'll be at a really good moisture level for tilling. It'll be soft, it will till up much easier, it'll break up the clods, the tiller won't bounce around so much. So that's what you want to do to get the garden ready for planting. Or if you're just going to be digging it up by hand, it's a whole lot easier to dig up if it's been moist and not muddy, but, you know, moist enough to where it, you know, can be dug up or forked over easily. All right, let's talk a little bit about watering for the fall garden. Again, we talked about why it's so important, because not like it is in the spring, we're not going to be getting lots of rain. We're not going to have a lot of cool temperatures. It's going to be hot, and we're not getting much rain. So there's a little bit of watering principles that are just good background. Most of the water is actually lost through evaporation. That's the way that water dries out from the soil, is the sun shines on the soil and the water evaporates. It's not like the plants are drinking all the water. You water the soil, the plants, yeah, take up what they can, but any soil that's left in the ground is going to eventually evaporate directly from the soil surface. So that's the other thing to know, is that the soil surface dries out from the top. The top inch is going to dry out first, and then the next inch after that, and the next inch after that. So what happens in really, really hot weather, you might go out and water your garden for just a little bit, and then literally the next day, or sometimes even that afternoon, if you watered in the morning, it looks like it's dry all night. And that confuses people. They say, well, I just watered yesterday, I guess I need to water again. And so they'll water again, and that way, and it dries out again the next day, and they think they need to water every day. And that's not good, because that can keep the soil too wet down below. So it might be wet down below, but up above, just that top inch dries out, and so they think they need to water. The other principle is that younger plants, either a young plant that you plant out or a young seedling that's developing, they need more frequent watering, but also shallower water. They don't need to be watered as deeply because their roots aren't as deep yet. Eventually, when they grow longer, they will have deeper roots. So older plants need less frequent watering, and they need deeper watering. So when your fall garden, you're going to water a whole bunch. You probably will be watering every day at the beginning, because you're trying to get seeds to sprout. You're trying to get little seedlings to take hold. But you don't need to water as deeply because their roots aren't very deep. But as the plants grow, their roots go down deeper. You'll water less often, but you'll have to water more at a time, so the water will soak in and go down deep to where the roots are. So that's the difference between the younger plants and the older plants. So as you get farther into that fall garden season, you won't do it as often, but when you do it, you're going to do it for a longer time. so that the water goes down deeper. So again, seeds and seedlings, just remind you, water frequently, water shallow, don't let them dry out, or you could lose them real quickly when it's 100 degrees. Same thing with the transplants. You're setting out little baby plants, water frequently, water shallow. I also recommend putting a circle of mulch around each plant. Let's say you don't have enough mulch to mulch the whole bed thickly. If you can just put a little circle of mulch about 8 to 12 inches in diameter around that little plant that you plant, that will stop it from drying out so quickly. Otherwise, you could water it and come back the next day, it could be totally dead just because it got too hot and dried out. But putting that circle of mulch will keep the soil surface moisture and stop the little plant from drying out. Again, the established plants that have been in for a while, you're going to water deeply and less often. And of course, the entire bed should be mulched, because that'll help it not need water as often either. At that point, you want to have the whole bed mulched. So here's a question. People lots of times don't know if they've watered or not. And I would say most people, if you're watering by hand, don't water it out. If you're putting a sprinkler on and you leave it on for 2 or 3 hours, and you can tell it got really good soak, you can actually put a rain gauge out. But if you're just watering a little area and you're watering it by hand, how do you know if you gave it enough? Well, one way is to actually have a little rain gauge out and measure how much. But again, it's hard to tell if you've done it evenly. But just so you'll know, plants need at least 1 inch of water, in preferably 1.5 inches of water. If 1.5 inches of water every week, and that is the ideal. And so if we get rain and you get 1 inch of rain, that's great. You get 1.5 inches rain, that's the ideal. But let's say you only get 1/4 inch of rain or less, then you still need to water by hand to make up the difference. So it's real important. Let's say you're going to water a raised bed, or you have a small garden patch. Say it's 12 feet by 4 feet. That's the size we make a lot of our raised beds. It's a good size for a raised bed. So it's about 50 square feet, just a little bit less. To put down 1.5 inches of water, or 1 inch of water, it's going to take 30 to 45 gallons. So that's a lot of water for one raised bed, and that's going to be for the week. Sometimes if it's really hot, you might do that twice a week. If you want to really grow your crops well. But your average hose pressure is going to put out about 5 gallons a minute. And if you're going to try and put 45 gallons down to water that raised bed, that's going to take 9 minutes. If you're only going to put down 1 inch of water, it'll only take like 6 minutes. But somewhere between 6 and 9 minutes is the right amount of time. If it's hot summer, I say 9 minutes. I would do that. And so the best tool to use for watering, let me see if I have a slide that talks about that. Nope, no, okay. Best tool to use for watering is what we call a watering wand. And if you look at this picture here, you can see the wand. A lot of people have seen these. We see them in the stores now. There's lots of different kinds. I do not like the ones that have the multiple settings on them. The problem being is that none of the settings work really well. It's better just to have what we call a regular water breaker head. That's this nozzle here. It breaks the water down into a nice spray. It's more gentle for the plants. There's a company, usually I don't do commercials for people, but this company makes really good water heads. Their name is Dramm, D-R-A-M-M, and you can see those at garden centers. You can order them online. And you can order just a little nozzle if you want. You don't have to have a wand. A wand is handy. It helps you reach spots, so you don't have to bend over. But even if you just have this nozzle, that's better than not having a hose nozzle at all. And for sure, don't use the little thing that looks like a gun, because that pressure from that is too strong. That's what you use to wash your car with, not for watering your garden, because it comes out with too much force. This watering breaker on the end of this watering wand gives a nice delicate spray that is much more gentle and is not hard on the plants. The wands, sometimes they're plastic, sometimes they're aluminum. What's also nice is to get one with a shutoff. Sometimes you can get one that they actually have the shutoff built into the wand, and you just push forward to go and pull back to stop it. And you can turn it on and off as much as you need, which is really handy because sometimes you don't want to water a certain area and you want to turn the water off, but you don't want to have to walk all the way back to the faucet. So you have a shutoff, you can just turn it off quickly at the nozzle, at the wand, so that you don't have the water coming out all the time. Really good watering wand is a good investment with a good water breaker on the end. And okay, the other key to success, besides picking the right crops, we talked about that. We talked about planting at the right time, and then we talked about watering and now mulching. One of the most important things you can do to have a successful fall garden is to mulch. And sometimes people don't understand what that even means. So mulching is where you put down some organic matter to help shade the soil. And you put down a layer, maybe 2 to 3 inches. Here you can see some straw that's around these plants, and it's going to help keep that soil cooler. It won't dry out so quickly. It helps keep down the weeds. So lots and lots of good reasons for mulch. Let's talk about which materials are the best for mulching. Good mulches would be straw. Straw comes in bales. Straw is a little bit different than hay. Hay is what you feed horses and sheep, and it's got more weeds in it. Straw is what's left after they harvest the wheat. It's basically the stalk of the wheat after they take the seeds out. Sometimes there'll be a few seeds in it from the wheat harvest, and you'll get a little bit of wheatgrass sprouting up, and you might have to pull that out. But it's pretty easy to do, but it's not as bad as getting the weeds from a pasture which has been cut for hay. So straw is good. If you're going to buy something in a bag, I would recommend this product called cotton burr compost. Sometimes it's called cotton boll compost. Here at Community Gardens, we just call it CDC. Anyhow, it makes a nice mulch. It's the ground part of the plant that holds the little cotton ball. That's the boll. And sometimes it's called the cotton burr. And it is ground up, and it looks kind of like shredded bark or something. Makes a really nice mulch. It improves the condition of the soil. So if you're going to buy something in a bag, that's what I would recommend. It's more expensive to buy in a bag. So straw, you can buy pretty cheap. We sell straw here at the Kansas City Community Gardens. The other thing that I think works extremely well is grass clippings. If you have a lawnmower with a grass catcher bag, you can catch grass clippings. And again, you'd want to use grass that has not been sprayed with chemicals. Sometimes people will do the chemicals in the front yard, but the backyard, they don't do that because of kids and pets and gardens and things. So you could collect the grass clippings from the backyard where it hasn't been sprayed. The grass clippings make a tremendous mulch. I like them because they're very soft and flexible. They're easier to kind of work around small plants. Sometimes the straw is a little big and clunky, a little bit long. So it's kind of harder to get a nice even layer around tiny plants. But straw is definitely a good mulch to use. But grass clippings are my actual favorite. So it makes a really nice mulch. And the cost is great. If you don't have a lawn catcher for your mower, sometimes you can buy one and retrofit it. So you might have to order it, or the next time you buy a lawnmower, it's definitely worth making sure you get one with a grass catcher bag. So those were the good mulches: straw, cotton burr compost, and grass clippings. The bad mulch would be things like wood chips. Everybody in the world is trying to find a good use for wood chips, so you usually can get them free. Sometimes you have to pay for them if they're nice wood chips. But even still, they're not a great mulch for vegetable gardens. Around trees and shrubs, you know, fine. We use them around our fruit trees when we plant them, but I don't think it's good for the vegetable garden. And part of the reason is because it can actually steal nitrogen out of the soil as the wood chips decompose. That has to do with the whole process of decomposition. It has to do with the bacteria that break down the wood chips. They tie up the nitrogen in the soil, so your plants will starve. Same thing is true for sawdust. It's just basically wood chips that are more fine in the ground. So wood chips are not good. And the other thing is they don't really help keep the weeds down. There's other problems like you can get splinters from them when you're trying to pull weeds out by hand if you're not wearing gloves. And also they can attract termites, you know, so if you're gardening close to your house or a garden shed, wood chips not good because you're providing food for the termites, which is not a good thing. Shredded bark, again, also is not a good product for vegetable gardens, I think. You can use it, but it's really not great. Again, it can tie up the nitrogen in the soil. There's splinter issues. Not a good mulch. There's also rubber mulch out on the market. You'll see that's made from tires that have been recycled. Not in favor of that because they don't break down. They stay, around forever. And there's some questions of toxicity that come from the tires that were used. And maybe on a playground, maybe rubber mulch is a good idea, but definitely not for your vegetable garden. And then some people like to use black plastic. You'll read about that, especially for things like cantaloupes and watermelons. Sometimes around tomatoes, people use black plastic. I'm not a big fan of black plastic as a mulch because it does not let water through and it heats up the soil tremendously. That black just absorbs the heat from the sun. Not a good choice. Some people will use landscape fabric, which is plastic also, and it's black, but it's woven, and so it lets the water through and lets the air exchange through there. But it still can get hot, so sometimes people will put grass clippings or straw over their landscape fabric, but that can help keep the weeds down. But that's not the same as just clear polyethylene or black polyethylene. So those are the mulches I do not recommend. And then just a little bit, I want to talk about extending the fall gardening season. How do you keep your crops going on for a longer period of time? People used to grow things in cold frames for a while. You can see in the lower left hand, there's a cold frame. Those are kind of high maintenance because you have to open them and close them. If the sun comes out, you got to open them. The sun, goes behind the cloud. You got to close them if it gets too cool. They're a lot of work, and the cost is prohibitive. Of course, a greenhouse would be nice if you had your own little greenhouse. That's not practical for everybody, and most of the home greenhouses I've seen are not for adequate ventilation and heating. But the one thing that I do recommend is row cover. A lot of people use row cover just when frost is threatening, but it also works really well just to help things grow even after frost on through the season in the fall for a longer period of time, and makes them grow faster. So row cover can be a really good growth enhancer, and it lets the light through, it lets water through, very lightweight. You can see here in this picture the plants growing underneath there. Sometimes people will actually just let it rest right on top of the plants, and as they grow, they will lift it up. Other people like to put little plastic hoops or metal hoops over it, and it's called a low tunnel structure, and it doesn't overheat in there. That's the other thing with plastic. If you put plastic down, it would overheat and get really, really hot because there's no good ventilation. But the row cover doesn't overheat. Here's some more pictures of row cover just to see. You can see these plants here doing really well under the row cover. That gives you a nice late crop of greens that you can pick farther into November and December. You can actually overwinter crops under row cover. I do want to call your attention to in this lower left-hand picture, and there you see somewhere the row cover just resting right on top of the crop, so that works. If they're really tiny seedlings, you might want to have the hoops, but if the crop is growing pretty vigorously, it can support the fabric without any kind of hoops to hold up the cloth. But sometimes you do need to pin it down. Sometimes I'll put like a 2x4 down, or I'll put bricks or stones down to weight it down so it does not blow away. And then, of course, when you're done with it, you want to put it away and roll it up and keep it dry for next season. There are a few crops that you can actually plant later in the fall. And this is more like fall, and then have them growing under the row cover, and then harvest them throughout the winter. And this is really exciting to do if you've never done it before. These three crops here are the best for it: spinach and kale and collards. They're all very hardy. In fact, most of them would go through the winter without even being covered up. But if you want to keep the leaves in nice shape for eating, you want to go out and pick some spinach or kale or collards in January, February, when there's a lot of snow on the ground and it's 10 degrees outside. You want to use row cover. That will help protect the leaves, keep them in good shape so they don't get frozen, the leaves. So that will help them quite a bit. But you can literally harvest kale, spinach, and collards all through the winter, December, January, February, March, and even up until almost April, when you'll have some of your other spring planter crops coming along. All right, now we're going to briefly talk about some of the special crops for fall, the ones that are the most successful and that a lot of people want to try, just to give you a little background on each one of them. And then we'll get to see if we have any questions after that. Broccoli is a really good candidate for freezing. So a lot of things don't freeze well, but broccoli does freeze really well. And again, you get higher quality growing in the fall because it finishes up in the cool season. And even after you cut that main head, like you see that top picture there, you cut that main head off, it'll still have side branches coming out, and they'll keep producing for a long, long time. It is susceptible because it's a member of the cabbage family, susceptible to the cabbage worms and the cabbage loopers. But it's not as much susceptible to the hot weather issue that happens with spring broccoli. Spring broccoli, when it gets too hot, the broccoli doesn't taste good, the quality isn't good. It's kind of got an off flavor to it and doesn't produce as fast. But the fall broccoli will keep on growing. If you row cover, it will keep on growing even longer. So broccoli is a great fall garden crop. Cabbage also, you don't really freeze it, but it keeps for a long time. Again, you'll have better quality in the fall because of the cooler weather. And the thing to remember about cabbage is edible at any stage. Yeah, you want to have a nice big head of cabbage. But let's say you put out 12 cabbage plants and they're all the same kind. They're all going to be ready during that same week. And so what are you going to do with 12 heads of cabbage? Yeah, if you have extra refrigerator, you can put them in the refrigerator and they will store for a couple months, maybe 3 months. And of course, you can make some kind of like preserved cabbage dish. But cabbage doesn't really freeze well. So what I tell people is when you've got several cabbages coming along, is you can eat one of those heads when it's pretty small, and then the week later you can eat another one, and then you'll have some that are full size and eat them. And then you can put some in the refrigerator. The idea is to maybe have some different varieties, but not have them all mature at the same time. And then eat some of them earlier before they're full size. The other thing to watch out for is after a big rain, if it's been dry, lots of times cabbage will split open. And you want to keep an eye for that. Because if that happens, you need to eat it right away. It won't keep as long. And again, they're susceptible to the insect attack, just like the broccoli, those cabbage worms and the cabbage loopers. Carrots are a great fall crop. Again, they're going to be higher quality. They're also a good long storage candidate. Excuse me. Carrots will keep a long time in the refrigerator, but also you can actually store carrots in the ground. In fact, it's kind of an old farmer trick. They would, wait till it got really, really cold, and then they'd mound up some soil around their carrots and basically just bury them, and then go out in the middle of winter and dig them up whenever they're needing some fresh vegetables. And you can have fresh carrots in December and January and February. What some people do now is put row cover over it, and that makes it easier. But in any case, you can just bury them and go out and pick them whenever you need. So the one thing with carrots is the germination is a little tricky, especially in the late summer when it's so hot. You literally have to keep that soil moist almost continually. And so sometimes a soaker hose, or go out and water 3 or 4 times a day, just the surface of the soil, to make sure those seeds germinate. And once they germinate, you don't have to water them quite as often. The other thing with carrots is the seeds are tiny, and it's really easy to drop them and get them too close together. So generally you have to thin carrots out to where they're about, 1.5 inches apart. They can be pretty close, but if they're closer than that, they're not going to develop into full-size carrots. So you want to make sure you thin your carrots. And they don't transplant well, so it's not like if you pull one out, you can move it somewhere else. It's better just to pull it out and get rid of it. Cauliflower, of course, related to cabbage and broccoli. Again, you're going to start with plants, not from seeds. The one thing that's a little bit different about cauliflower is it's a good idea to do what they call is blanch the cauliflower. And what that means is you are covering up that head so that it's not exposed to the sun. And they kind of do that themselves. They have what these called the wrapper leaves. These leaves here kind of cover it up and hide it, but it's still going to get some sun. Of course, you see this head down here is getting full sun. That's ideally for the picture. What you would do with this is you take like this leaf and this leaf, pull them together, and put like a clothespin over it, so that it will totally shade it out. And that will keep that cauliflower in good condition, that head. Otherwise, it's going to turn purple on you. And there are some purple cauliflowers, but they're meant to be purple. But your average white cauliflower is not meant to turn purple. That's what happens in the sun, and the quality goes down, and it does not taste good. So you want to go ahead and pull the leaves up over the curds and tie it like with a clothespin. You want to wait not too long to pick it. Just like broccoli, if you wait too long, it'll start to sprout. You want to pick it while those curds, that's what they call them, the little chunks of cauliflower, while they're still tight and firm, not starting to sprout open. In Kansas City, sometimes it's challenging to grow cauliflower because they do need a long cool season. But fall cauliflower sometimes works a lot better than spring cauliflower because they are finishing up in the cool weather. So don't wait too late to plant it, so they won't have enough time to finish. And again, just like the cabbage and broccoli, you're going to have to control those cabbage worms and cabbage loopers, which if you need information about that, it's on our website. You can also go back and watch the workshop we did on insects and controlling, vegetable insects in your garden. How do you control them naturally and easily, so sustainably? So go back and look at that if you have questions about controlling these insects. Another vegetable that I really like a lot called Chinese cabbage, sometimes called Napa cabbage because they grow a lot of them in the Napa Valley in California. It has a long storage life, but not as long as regular cabbage, the regular traditional cabbage. These Asian cabbages are used a lot with Asian cooking. In fact, if you have, stir fry or egg rolls, traditional ones will have this kind of cabbage and not the other type of cabbage. So fall plantings do really well. Again, edible at every stage. They are susceptible to flea beetles. Eat little tiny holes. You've seen flea beetles on eggplants. They like the Chinese cabbage, the Napa cabbage. But again, you can grow really nice cabbages. I don't know if you've ever seen these in the store, but they get pretty large. It's not unusual to see one be like 5 pounds. It's not unusual to see it be like $2 a pound. So you could buy a big Chinese cabbage, Napa cabbage, at the grocery store and spend $10 for one cabbage. But they're so easy to grow. So if you like them, They're a lot more versatile than regular cabbage. You can use them like to make leaf wraps with vegetables and meat in them. There's just all kinds of things you can do with them. And they're so economical to grow yourself. So definitely worth trying if you haven't tried it. Green beans we mentioned. For fall crop, you can only want to do bush varieties. You don't want to plant pole varieties. The short season varieties are the best. So we have a variety called Provider. It's probably one of the quickest growing green beans, works really well for fall gardens. And then of course you want to pick them at the proper stage. You don't want to let them get too big and thick. You want to be small and slender. Like in this picture here, you see the ones on the right. Those are your traditional green beans. The one on the left, that's a different variety. That's a special heirloom variety that's called Dragon Tongue. There's a French name for it, which I can't pronounce very well. But it's kind of a yellow bean with little streakings of purple in it. And it's very attractive. It's flat. It's very sweet. In fact, it's actually sweet enough and tender enough and crisp enough that you can eat it just as a vegetable in a salad without cooking it. And that's not true of most green beans. They would not be a candidate for that. But this is a great candidate. There's lots of different special recipes. You can cook them pretty much as you would a green bean. Very tasty and just something a little bit different. So I recommend trying them if you haven't had them before. Lettuce, fall lettuce is generally sweeter. We are close to wrapping up here if you need to go. You'll also be able to finish watching later online if you can't stay for the whole presentation here. Anyhow, fall lettuce is sweeter generally than spring lettuce. Doesn't go to seed as quickly, doesn't get bitter because it's getting cooler. If you plant too early, it can still go to seed and get bitter on you. But if you plant at the proper time, a little bit later, look at the planting calendar, and then you won't be planting too early. You can grow full-size heads. I like the romaine lettuces. I like this one here on the top. That's called canasta. It's what they call a French crisp lettuce. Sometimes they call it a Batavian head lettuce. It's really good, very nutritious, but also nice and crisp. Easy to grow, doesn't go to seed too quickly. And I do like the romaine lettuces. But you can also grow the leaf lettuces. If you like to plant the mixture, we have our special KCCG mixture, which is a bunch of different kinds of lettuces, and that kind of gives you what they call that spring mix, even though it will be fall. But if you like little, cut the small leaves and have them in a mix, different types, different colors, that's easy to do. Or you can have both kinds. You can have the head lettuce and the small leaf lettuce that you cut the leaves. Again, don't plant too early. Don't try and jump the gun on it because it will go to seed and bolt. If you ever hear that term bolting, all that means is it's talking about a plant going to seed before it's regular time. Spinach is a great fall crop. It's a hardy winter annual. We mentioned it as one of the ones that can overwinter. But you can harvest it throughout the winter, especially if you protect it with some row cover. If you plant it in the fall, it will give you early crops in the spring, but they will go to seed quicker in the spring. But if you plant it early, late summer, for harvesting in the fall, it doesn't go to seed like spring spinach. I do like the variety called Noble Giant or Noble Giant. You see that in the bottom picture here, just because it has bigger leaves. Lots of times people have a hard time getting spinach with good sized leaves. They're always very tiny. And sometimes that's because they're growing them too close together, but it's also the variety. Some varieties just won't get as big. The Noble Giant produces large leaves and they're really great. So I like it for lots of things, for sauteing, using recipes and salads. And you can pick them smaller if you want to. Collards or collard greens. Again, you can plant this one from seeds, or you can put out transplants. We will have transplants available. The fall planted collards will be smaller and more tender. You can plant collards in the spring and keep them going all summer because it's pretty heat tolerant, not like some greens like turnips or mustard or spinach. And it will go all summer long, and then they'll grow faster in the fall. So picking the leaves from the bottom up. In this bottom picture, you see some collards that were planted in the spring, grown over the summer, and now it's fall here, and they look like, I don't know, something on a mop or something, and they're still growing, and you just got to keep the cabbage worms off of them, the cabbage loopers, and collards are very hardy. Again, that's one of the ones that can overwinter. Even without protection, you can still harvest them, at Thanksgiving time, and sometimes Christmas time, without covering them. But sometimes it gets too cold for that. Again, so if you're going to try and overwinter them, I do recommend you plant some for fall because they won't be too tall. It would be hard to cover these up with a row cover because of the height. But if you plant the ones for fall, they're not quite as tall and they'll have lots of leaves close to the ground. And collards are super nutritious. If you haven't tried them before, I do recommend them. Kale too, similar to collards in many ways. You can plant seeds or transplants. I think it's easier to put out plants. You can pick the leaves through the summer. Sometimes in the really hot part of summer, they aren't very high quality, but they'll survive, and you can keep them growing on into the fall. You can also plant new plants for fall, and they'll do well. Here you see 3 different kinds, just a regular green ruffled leaf kale. This one is called winter boar. The one down here in the left-hand corner is called red boar. It's got purple leaves, very attractive. And then this one here is what they call a Tuscan kale. Sometimes it's called dinosaur kale because it has this rough skin that looks kind of like the skin of a dinosaur, I guess. But it's people like that Tuscan kale, the dinosaur kale a lot too. So different kinds of kale, and they're all good. Arugula is a green that does not do well in the heat of summer, but early spring does fine. For fall, does great too, grows fast, got a nice flavor to it. Lots of times you'll see this in a salad mix. If you wait them too long to pick, the leaves get kind of strong tasting. Sometimes they call it sort of a skunky taste. It's best to put this out as seeds rather than try and do a transplant. And it also is popular by flea beetles. If you look at the picture on the top, you can see little tiny holes that have been chomped on by flea beetles. One down below isn't being eaten so much, so that was better. But it is a really nice and nutritious green to add to the dishes. Cilantro, people love cilantro or they hate cilantro, one or the other. Again, it works best as putting seeds out rather than plants. Just because if you put transplants out, they go to seed really quickly, so it may not be worth it. In cilantro, you're using the leaves, and eventually, when it gets hot, it goes to seed. So the spring planted cilantro goes to seed pretty quickly. Fall planted cilantro, your first ones might go to seed, but then you can wait a couple of weeks and plant the second batch, and then maybe wait another 2 or 3 weeks and plant a third batch, and that way you keep it going and have really nice crops. The fall crops do definitely last longer and don't go to seed so quickly. The seeds, if you're not familiar, are actually become the spice of coriander. So when they become dry and harvest them, people sometimes will take those seeds and grind them up, and that's the herb coriander that is used in some recipes. All right, where can you get plants and seeds? Lots of times you go to places like the big box stores, even some of the nurseries, they don't keep those seeds around. They ship them back, they get rid of them. They're not carrying them in the fall. So late summer might be hard to find. Hopefully you can still have some of your spring seeds left and use them if you've got them. They should be good still. But if you need to buy new seeds, you can buy them online from different mail order nurseries, seed catalogs. You can also buy them at Kansas City Community Garden. If you're not familiar, we are a membership organization, and you can join and become a member. Our mission is to help low-income households and community groups and schools to grow food. But if you're not low income, you can join and become a member. Your membership price will just be more, but it's still very reasonable, and we have good seeds and good plants available. You can start your own plants. but you would have to do that like 3 weeks ago, you know, if you're going to grow cabbage or broccoli. So that's also kind of hard to do when it's so hot. The other thing is, if you go to a nursery, like a local greenhouse, they might have plants for fall gardening, they'll advertise them. But the strange thing is, they don't have them ready when it's the right planting time. They don't have them ready about July 25th through August 5th. That's the prime season for putting those plants out. They don't have them until about the 1st of September, like broccoli, cabbage, kale, lettuce. I mean, lettuce would work, but broccoli, cabbage, and kale, it's too late. And cauliflower, it's too late if you plant those September 1st. We won't have enough time to finish. Maybe if you put row cover over them, that would work. So I do not recommend going to a nursery and buying, you know, fall plants, you know, at the beginning of September. If they have them sooner, great, but I never see that. Always totally surprised. I think part of it is their business doesn't really start picking up until September. And also, they just also think that people don't know the right time to plant, and people don't feel like planting until it's starting to be almost fall, like in September. So you really need to be planting in late summer for fall. So we will have plants. They are growing right now. We had originally scheduled them for going on sale on July 21st, Thursday coming up, but we're postponing that. They're growing a little bit slow. They got delayed just a little bit. So we're going to have them on sale starting July 26th for the broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Napa cabbage, kale, collards, and Swiss chard. Lettuce will be available a little bit later, August 22nd. Again, that's because you don't want to put lettuce out too soon. It'll throw the seed on you, the bolt, and won't do well. But the other ones will be available July 26th. You can watch the weather. You don't have to come on that day. That's the first day we offer it. If it works out better for you to come a few days later, that's fine. The timing is still good. It's got to like August 10th. So you still have plenty of time. So again, we're going to look at that 10-day forecast when we get to the week of July 26th and see if the weather's looking good, you can plant right away. If it's going to be a little while, you might want to wait a few days till it cools down a little bit. If it doesn't cool down significantly, then I just tell people finally by August 5th, go ahead and just plant and just take really good care of them. And usually it'll break pretty quickly after that. Get a little better at least. It might still be hot, but it won't be as hot. So usually get past that 100-degree temperature stuff. So again, if you haven't been to Kansas City Community Gardens, we're located here in Swope Park. Our website, if you just Google Kansas City Community Gardens, it'll pop right up, but it's kccg.org. Lots of great gardening information, including fall gardening information there, planting calendars, useful tips, lots of great videos. I definitely recommend checking out the video library. Let's check and see if we have any questions. Rob, do you know if there's been any questions that people have submitted?
Yeah, I just sent you an email with about 4 questions.
Okay, let me pull that up on my phone. Okay. First question was about green beans. Do you pull green beans after the harvest? So lots of times, you know, when you plant your spring green beans, typically you'll have what they call like 3 pickings. You know, they're not going to be all right at the same time. So you'll pick them, get a nice big batch that you pick them, and then they'll grow a few more. And then you'll go out and pick them the second time. And typically, if the weather's good and it's not too hot, you'll get a 3rd picking. They'll be spaced up, you know, about 7 to 10 days apart while those beans develop. And so by that 3rd picking, they're definitely done and not worth keeping to try and have them grow over the hot summer and then to try and produce more beans in the fall. They usually just don't keep that well. So as soon as they're done in the spring, I tell people pull them out. I also say at that point, it's a good idea to put mulch down because there's a little bit of a lag time from when you pull them out in the end of June to the end of July when you're planting. Sometimes it's 3 weeks or so. But if you put some mulch down, you won't get weeds coming up and will keep your soil in good shape for planting. So the question that they were having was, do you leave the beans? Because beans are legumes and the roots fix nitrogen. And so the question is, would you want to leave it for that purpose? I would say no, because the thing is, you do not get that much benefit from the green beans being in the ground. They don't sequester very much nitrogen from the air. Typically, that works more with longer term crops, things like clover and alfalfa, some of the cover crops like vetch. They have more time, so they actually develop those root nodules that are able to, assimilate that nitrogen out of the air and put it into the plant and into the soil. So don't worry about pulling your green beans. I would just pull them out as soon as the crop is done. The next question, are the snap peas that you get from community gardens, are they the dwarf variety? Well, we actually have two different kinds, and they have a different name. And so the main one that we sell in the spring is called the sugar snap peas. And that's part of our regular seed selection. And it is the long season one. So that one is not the one you want for fall. The fall one is what's called Sugar Ann. It's the dwarf variety, and that we sell through our beanstalk seeds variety, the specialty seeds. The seeds cost a little more. And so, but that's the one that you would want to get for fall garden, is the Sugar Ann, because it is the dwarf variety. Another question was, any thoughts on using silver mulch as a pest deterrent? There have been some experiments done recently where people get like a fabric type thing that is kind of coated silver on one side and use that, or others silver coated mulches. And that has been shown to be a little bit of a pest deterrent because of the reflection. The pests don't want to be as close to the plants because of that bright reflection from the silver. But I think the jury's still kind of out on that. I don't know if it's worth investing in. I'd have to read some more about it, but I'm sure there's people that are trying to sell you silver mulch because that's one way to make more money, right? But whether or not it actually is that effective is another question. So I probably am not ready to go out and invest a lot in it, but I'm definitely interested in hearing more about it, and we'll do some more research just to see if they're finding out more about it. Okay, here's another question, is what family of crops is the best to rotate in raised beds with these common fall cool weather veggies? So in the springtime, we talk about rotating crops because it's a good idea, because sometimes the insect population builds up, sometimes the disease population builds up. So like if you had cabbage and broccoli in a raised bed, it's not horrible, but sometimes it's better if you put something else there. So if you pick from a different family, like lettuce and spinach, that would be a good thing to follow the cabbage and broccoli. If you had something like peas or radishes, something that isn't in that cabbage family, then you could follow that up with, or even green beans, you could follow that up with members of the cabbage family. We do have a handout available or available on the website. You can look at that and we'll list those different families. And then you can basically just pick from the different crop, the different family, a cool season crop that could go in a different place. But it's not the end of the world if you don't have the space to do that. And let's say you just have one raised bed and you have cabbage and broccoli in it, and you're going to want that for fall, it's not that big a deal. But the following spring, you might want to put something different in there. Maybe have that be where you're going to plant your tomatoes and peppers and not do the cabbage and broccoli plants in the springtime. So it's okay if you have to. You don't have much option to repeat with the same plant, family, and not actually rotate the crop. But if you can do it, it's definitely going to be helpful. So that's, I think, all the questions. If you do have more questions sometimes, you can send us an email. Send it to contact@kccg.org. and we can get those questions. And of course, when you come in to buy plants, if you buy plants or seeds, we can answer questions for you. So that plant sale, remember, is delayed till July 26th. That's a Tuesday, but that is not the only day. You can buy them on the next day, Wednesday, the 27th, the 28th. You know, we'll probably have a good supply of them. We don't usually run out in the fall because not as many people are clued in about fall gardening. We hope more people learn about it and try it, but we usually have plenty of plants. So we've got at least till that August 5th, August 10th date. But you know, somewhere in there, look at the weather, look at that 10-day forecast, and look for a good, cool planting window, or at least slightly cooler. All right, thanks everybody for checking this out, and sure and tell your friends about it. They can go watch later on the website. Thank you.